Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Happy Monday night. It's going to be another great episode. We're going to be talking about how to get rid of headaches, how to deal with headaches, what kinds of headaches there are, and what you can do naturally to overcome them without the toxic side effects of a number of different types of medications. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. We are out to help 100 million people. So what I'd like you to do, if you know somebody tonight who can benefit from this conversation, from this topic, go ahead and make sure that you're sharing it with them. And hashtag for me, hashtag help 100 million, right? That's what we're after. We're after helping other people as well. The other thing I'd like you to make sure that you do is chime in and let me know where you're coming from. So if you're from, Anytown, USA, I want to know where that's from. I like to know where our audience is reaching. So it looks like tonight we've got Marie from Canada and Chris from Mexico and Marianne is chiming in. Some of you are chiming in but not telling me where you're from. Let me know where you're from. Maxine from Pennsylvania and Barbara from St. Louis, Missouri. I got family in Missouri. And let's see, we got Donna from Sugar Land. Lori from Arizona, Susan from Washington, another Susan from New Orleans, Tracy from South Carolina, we got Illinois in the house, Jay from California. Keep coming, keep them coming. I like to know where you guys are from. So again, tonight, the topic of conversation is the infamous headache. So how do we get rid of headaches? First of all, let's classify. Let's do a little bit of classification about headaches. There are different types of headaches, and I'm not going to go into every single type, but there's structural headaches. We also have biochemical headaches. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. We've got infection or infectious based headaches, and that oftentimes manifests with sinus pressure, sinus infections, etc. So we'll kind of go through these and break them down because they can manifest differently. They can manifest with different symptoms. And so we'll start with structural. So many people develop headaches and they can be migraine-like. In essence, well, some people are like, why aren't you writing migraine down on the board? And somebody was chiming in a minute ago that they're actually dealing with a migraine right now. So because migraines can be structural, migraines can also be chemical. So migraines can fall under multiple of these classes. Migraines can also be caused by infection. So as we break this down, structural headaches a lot of times begin with abnormal muscles or joint articulations within the cervical spine, in the back of the neck itself, or the occiput, the way the occiput, the base of the skull, sits on top of your top vertebrae, the top bone in your neck. Realize that with structure we can develop, for many people what happens is the chronic tension, the chronic stress, the chronic caffeine use will cause muscular tightening. So with chemical headaches, or with structural headaches, a lot of times we're looking at the musculoskeletal system. So we're looking at muscles in bones and the way that they articulate to try to evaluate whether or not and how that might be potentially triggering. So tight muscles in the base of the neck are a very, very common cause. And the way that headache might represent or manifest is oftentimes it's going to be in the back of the neck and it's going to wrap around the head and it's going to feel like just complete pressure over the entire head. So the fascia around the head is going to be compressed because these muscles back here are tight. Very, very common for structural headaches to create that type of scenario. Sometimes people will also develop kind of radiating pain down the arms because, again, that muscular tightness can also lead to, within the deep neck, can lead to compression of the brachial plexus, which is a plexus of nerves that travels down the arm. So sometimes what we'll see with structural headaches is radicular pain, radiating pain, also traveling into the arm, sometimes traveling just into the shoulder. So muscles and bones. What do you do? How do you know whether or not you have a structural headache? One of the best ways to help identify structural headaches is by having somebody assess your spine and your muscle fluidity, if you will. The best person, in my experience, the best qualified person to deal with structural headaches is a chiropractor. And so if you haven't visited, if you struggle with chronic headaches of this variety and you haven't been to a chiropractor, a lot of people they fear chiropractic mainly because there's a lot of propaganda out there. There actually, interestingly enough, there was a lawsuit about 30 years ago, and a chiropractor actually sued the American Medical Association because there was a lot of propaganda coming out. The American Medical Association was publishing a lot of propaganda that was false. It was actually, they were saying that when people get adjusted, it can break your neck, or that it can kill you, or that it can cause neurological problems and create permanent damage. So there was all this propaganda about how dangerous getting a neck adjustment is, and the actual reality is that chiropractor that sued the AMA, if you want to read the book, it's called Wilk versus the AMA. It's a fantastic book. What Wilk showed with his attorneys is he showed that the AMA had actually hired a secret body within itself for the sole explicit purpose of defrauding and defaming chiropractic care and scaring people away from it, because their attempt was they were trying to monopolize healthcare. They didn't want anyone else coming into healthcare with any other options for treatment or care. So again, if you want to read more about that, Wilk versus the AMA, but my advice, if you're suffering with structural headaches and you haven't yet been to a chiropractor, that's going to be one of the best things that you can do. Now, there are a few other alternatives. Some people are deathly afraid of chiropractic, but there's also massage. Now, I wouldn't go to a massage therapist to diagnose the problem, but sometimes massage can really help temporarily relieve the stress and the tension within the muscles, and so that can be ineffective. And the other one is acupuncture. So acupuncture can also be ineffective at relieving the stress and the tension in the muscles, but won't correct bone misalignments. It will not correct what's called the vertebral subluxation, which is what a chiropractor specializes in. So if you're suffering with structural headaches, this is what I highly recommend. Now, I said as well that we were going to talk about some natural things. What can cause the muscles in the bones to really become tighter over time? One of them is your sleep. If you're sleeping, so getting enough sleep is very, very important, because sometimes people don't sleep enough and they wake up very, very tense and very, very tight. And the other is the type of pillow and how your head is positioned at night. The ideal positioning for your head when you're sleeping, and this is if you're sleeping on your side, is you want that pillow underneath your head. You want it butted all the way up to the shoulder, so that when you're lying on your side, your head is neutral with the rest of your spine. Because if that pillow's propped up and you're sleeping like this all night, you're going to create a muscular imbalance within your neck. Remember, when you're sleeping, it's generally anywhere from 4 to 8 hours for most people. And if you're, just like if you were leaning on your arm for 4 hours straight, what would happen? You get numbness, you get tingling, you get pain, all that would happen. You get muscular imbalance in your arm. Same thing can happen if your positioning when you're sleeping is inaccurate or inadequate. So make sure that you're positioned so that your head stays neutral with your spine when you're lying on your side. And if you're lying on your back, you want a nice curve in the neck. So a nice foam roll or a pillow that's not too big, that pushes your head too far forward, that leads to, again, a lot of these muscles being overly stretched, so that when you get out of bed in the morning, they want to have a reflexive rebound to tighten back up, creating an imbalance structurally that can lead to a problem. Now, there certainly are other structural problems that can lead to chronic headaches in this way, and one of them is a herniated disc. So, we didn't really talk about this, but this is actually it's a bone problem. If you've got it's a soft tissue problem, but in between the vertebrae in your neck, you have discs, and these discs, if you herniate one, these discs can put pressure into the nerve, and if they're putting pressure into the nerve, that nerve sends the message to your muscle, and so that can create muscle spasm. It can create radicular pain. It can create a neurological type of pain. So a disc herniation is also a very common structural issue that can manifest as a structural type of headache. So again, there are a number of things that can be done to identify that for a disc. One of the best ways to identify disc herniation is to have an MRI done, a cervical MRI in this case, where they're actually measuring from the base of the skull all the way down through your thoracic spine to the top part of your thoracic spine, where they can clearly see all of the different discs and whether or not those discs are either bulging or pressing out and impinging into some of your nerves. Again, it's when it impinges on the nerve that it creates an imbalance in the muscle, and that can lead to atrophy. So muscles can start to shrink because the nerve is not feeding them, but it can also lead to direct pain itself. So these are all just structural things that need to be potentially thought about or investigated. One of the other things that we commonly see that creates structural headache, and in our society today, this problem is extremely rampant, and that's chronic sitting. So many of you sitting at a desk for 8+ hours a day, and what happens when you're sitting at that desk is your eyes are straining. So understand that in your eyes you have muscles too. There are a number of different muscles. There are muscles that that open your pupil and close it down, so they help contract and relax the muscles of your iris so that you can focus in, or you can look from further away. But there are also muscles that are helping your eyes move from side to side, up, down, diagonally, etc. And these muscles, when you're sitting and staring at a screen all day, and whether that's a cell phone screen or whether that's a computer screen or one of these personal device screens, their eye muscles themselves can get strained. And so sitting can lead to eye strain. And so again, this becomes how long is that happening? How long are you having and experiencing that eye strain? And to what degree? Just like your muscles can get sore if you work them out really, really hard, your eyes, if you strain them, can become more and more problematic, and that can lead to headaches. So understanding that chronic sitting and chronic looking at screens can be part of the problem. The other is your head position. The head position, oftentimes when we're looking at a screen, depending on the level of that screen, but your eyes should be kind of not looking up like so, but there should be a slight upward angle as you're looking at your monitor. You shouldn't be looking down at your monitor. And so a lot of people's monitors are positioned below, so their head is tilted forward in such a way. And understand that for every inch that your head is tilted forward, there's a tremendous amount of gravitational force coming down. Most people's heads weigh about 10 pounds plus. So for every inch you go forward, that's 10 pounds plus the force of gravity that sits at the base of the neck, and over time that can build up, especially if you're doing it 8 hours a day. So your head position can play a big role in whether or not your muscles become overly tight, contributing to chronic headaches. Now, the reason I go through all this structural stuff, one of the reasons why, is because a lot of times when people suffer with headaches, it's not one kind of headache. There's the old saying, you're entitled to more than one problem. And so some people have a structural issue that contributes to the headache, but they also have a chemical issue that contributes to the headache. So let's dive in a little bit to the chemical issue here. And so let's just kind of poll before we dive into this one. How many of you are actually struggling, after what I've said, or actually think you might be struggling with a structural headache? If you feel like that may be part of your problem, let me hear about it. Tell me, just type in structural or structure, and I just kind of want to poll the room and see what we've got. In terms of how many of you are dealing with this type of element. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about chemical headaches. Now there's overlap between these two. Definitely there's overlap, because chemical headache oftentimes stems from vitamin and mineral deficiency. And when I say vitamin and mineral deficiency, understand that vitamins and minerals are chemicals that your body needs to properly function. So if you are deficient in certain vitamins and minerals, then what will happen is your muscles, your nerves potentially may malfunction, and that can trigger a headache as well. Just like structural problem can create a muscle imbalance, well, a chemical imbalance, a magnesium deficiency, a calcium deficiency, potassium deficiency can also create that muscular imbalance as well. So vitamin and mineral deficiencies very commonly can lead to muscle, we're going to abbreviate that, muscle problems, which can trigger a headache as well. Now, vitamin and mineral deficiencies can also lead to a nerve problem. And this is important because this is where migraine headaches can come in. Migraine headaches, there's a couple of different theories on why migraine headaches trigger. One is a vascular theory and the other is a neurological theory. Ultimately, they both boil down to nerves, because the nerves feed the blood vessels. So if you've got impinged vascular supply, that can actually be caused by the nerve not properly feeding it, right? So the nerve talks to the blood vessel about vasodilation and vasoconstriction, and if you've got a nerve problem, it can lead to a impinged vascular supply. The other thing here is that what's interesting, again, vitamins and minerals are what allow your nerves to properly communicate. Remember that term, electrolytes. Calcium's an electrolyte, magnesium's an electrolyte, potassium's an electrolyte, sodium's an electrolyte. if you're dehydrated all the time, if you don't drink enough water, this is one of the most common things I see in chronic headache sufferers is their water intake is very poor. They just don't get enough. And so that can lead to muscle problems. It can also lead to nerve problems. And again, all of this can play a role in the genesis of a migraine headache. So these are, just think of these as fundamental things. These things need to be investigated. Now, from the perspective of vitamins and minerals, something else I want to say is that there are certain vitamin deficiencies and mineral deficiencies that we call migraine prophylactics, meaning these are things that actually get prescribed oftentimes when people suffer with chronic migraines that can be very, very helpful because deficiency of these nutrients can actually trigger migraine headaches. And one of those is vitamin B12, one of those is vitamin B2, one of those is magnesium. These are probably the three most common, B12, B2, and magnesium deficiency, that can actually spark a migraine-based trigger based on vitamin and mineral deficiency. So not all that uncommon. You can ask your doctor to run or to check you for nutritional deficiencies. And as a matter of fact, if you're a chronic migraine or even non-migraine but a chronic headache sufferer, this is one of the first things that I recommend that you ask your doctor to do is to check your vitamin and mineral status, because oftentimes the answer, a big part of the answer, can be found right here. In essence, we can get dramatic improvements in headaches when we start dialing in some of the right vitamins. We see that especially with B12 and magnesium in my experience. Those are probably the two most common that I see when chronic headache sufferers get their blood work back in my office. We very, very frequently will see my magnesium and B12 deficiency. Let's see here. Occipital neuralgia. Ember's asking about occipital neuralgia. So this is where, if you suffer with an occipital neuralgia, this is where visiting with your chiropractor can be very, very helpful, because occipital neuralgia is oftentimes the occipital muscles along the back half, just right back here. It's those muscles, if you put your hands right along the baseline of your skull, those are your occipital muscles, and there's several of them, and their fibers go through, and it's very, very important. If you haven't had that assessed, a lot of times occipital neuralgias can actually come from muscular imbalance, which is what I was talking about before. So get a good diagnosis. Again, I'd go to a good chiropractor with a good reputation to see if they can help you evaluate that. Okay, let's see here. A lot of you saying structural headaches. A ton of you kind of chiming in with that. Now, so this is interesting. Maria says, yes, I get it, and I still go to the chiropractor too. So then the next question is, well, a lot of times, this is in my experience, that people that go see their chiropractor and they get adjusted will have temporary relief. So and that goes for any of these things, like massage, acupuncture, any of these natural kind of more non-medicative reasons why you might try to address your headache. But if you get temporary relief, it means you have more than one problem. Because and a lot of chiropractors will tell you this, they'll say the adjustments that we give don't work as long as they used to work. And part of the reason why is this, because it's not just vitamins and minerals, but it's also the food itself. Many people eat foods that they're allergic to. They eat foods that are headache triggers. Caffeine's a big one, even though caffeine technically is not a food, but it's within the food that you eat. But caffeine's a huge trigger here. Artificial sweeteners, another big trigger. And so those are oftentimes in the food. They're also, interestingly, in the toothpaste, the mouthwash. So you've got to be careful about them being in those locations. They're in chewing gum. I've seen cases where people did a really good job of avoiding what was in their food, but then they didn't realize their chewing gum contained something like a sulfame or other artificial sweeteners like NutraSweet or aspartame, etc. So again, these can be headache triggers. The food itself can be a headache trigger. So if you're getting any of this done, you get temporary relief, but the problem keeps coming back. It's because you've got a chemical imbalance that's recreating the muscle imbalance. In essence, remember that this can feed into this. Chemical can create a structural problem. And so if you are dealing with a structural problem and it keeps coming back, it's because there's an issue here that needs to also be addressed simultaneously. In essence, dealing with them concomitantly is going to be much more effective than dealing with one without dealing with the other. And this again goes back to getting a diagnosis, getting an assessment. And a lot of chiropractors are trained in nutrition, so they can help you understand some of these things as well. And they may be better, actually, in some cases, better equipped to be measuring vitamin and mineral deficiencies, because the average chiropractor has about 30 hours of training in nutrition in school, whereas the average medical doctor has less than 7. And the training difference is this: the 7 hours that a medical doctor gets is typically anti-nutrition training. The 30 hours that a chiropractor gets is typically pro-nutrition training. So they're oftentimes a lot better armed and knowledgeable and equipped to be able to measure those types of things. So again, that could be very, very helpful for any of you who are struggling, getting temporary relief, but not, beyond that, not getting long-term relief. Okay, let's see here. So let's, again, talking about other chemical responses. So we can get food as a chemical response. Food is a very, very common one. Oftentimes we'll see, especially for migraines, gluten. There's actually a lot of really great research on how gluten as a neurotoxin triggers migraine headache. We'll oftentimes see this really with dairy as well. And we'll oftentimes see this with anything that's processed sugar. And there's a couple of different reasons why. Processed sugar, remember that sugar without nutrients, so like, when you're drinking a soda or eating, processed sugar in the form of candy or confections, etc., there are no vitamins, there are no minerals in this. The vitamins and minerals have been stripped away from the sugar cane or the corn sugar or whatever the sugar, wherever it's deriving from. And so what's left is calories without nutrients. And so sugar actually rapes your body. It actually steals the nutrients when you eat it. Your body still has to convert that sugar into a source of energy. In order to do that, your body uses vitamins and minerals. And so if you're eating pure sugar in high quantities, you're actually stealing from your vitamin and mineral storage banks, and those vitamin and mineral deficiencies, again, all by themselves can create a headache. And this is one of the reasons why people who consistently eat sugar on a regular basis suffer with more headaches, or have that propensity to suffer with more headaches. Other food allergens can do it as well. It's not just these 3 food groups, but those are very, very common. We'll also see coffees that trigger hot, spicy foods can sometimes, for some people, be a trigger as well. But generally, in my experience, it's these ones. Now, we're talking about chemicals, and remember, food is a chemical, and so are some of the chemicals that are found in food. But then we also have things that you smell, right? So it's not just what you might eat, but it's also things that you take in. If you've been mall walking anytime recently, anytime you go through the mall, this store pipes in that odor, this store pipes in that odor. You're being bombarded with chemical aromas pretty much wherever you go. I know when I take an Uber or a Lyft ride, if they've got those things hanging up in their window, I won't ride with them, because those things really irritate me personally. So the smell factors can also be a major trigger. And this is one of those areas where if you're looking to make something smell better, my advice would be to use a pure and natural essential oil versus some of these synthetic chemicals that contain pinene and other things that can trigger a chemical-based headache or a chemical-based problem. So smell could be inclusive of cleaners. It could be inclusive of like detergents, so soaps, cleaners, detergents, perfumes. Those of you who douse in the perfume, understand that there are so many different chemicals now in these different perfumes that are being produced, and none of them have really been safety tested. The safety test comes with you, and it comes with all the people around you. But those smells, when you're bombarded with all of these different smells, and then you combine that with being bombarded by the chemicals in the food, and you combine that with something like this, and then you combine that with long-term sitting and eye strain, it's a perfect storm to have to deal with chronic headaches. So these things, again, all these things kind of work together and can be a major problem for many people. Now, there's also infectious headaches. And infectious headaches oftentimes in the sinuses, so like sinus pressure, where you're basically the mucus is being overproduced in your sinuses because of some type of infection. It's very common, for example, with bacterial infections. And in many areas, actually, this bacteria can be the root here. but so can mold or fungus or yeast. Mold is actually, there have been a number of studies that have shown that mold, upper sinus infections and respiratory infections, that mold is actually more common than bacteria. And what happens to a lot of people is they go into the doctor, they have this infection in their sinus, they don't get a culture. The doctor doesn't run a culture. They don't run a swab up into the nose and do a culture to see if it's mold versus bacteria. They just dispense the antibiotic. Then you take the antibiotic and it can actually make the mold grow even stronger. And this is what we see a lot of times in kids that suffer with recurring upper respiratory infections, and that the doctors just keep dispensing antibiotics without adequately doing a culture, what's called a culture sensitivity test. And so what ends up happening is they make that mold overgrowth even stronger with time. So make sure that if you suspect that you're in this category, that you ask your doctor to run a culture, okay, culture and sensitivity test. And this is very easy to do. What you want to do is just culture out what's growing inside of you, and then also determine what best, if you're going to use a medicine, what medicine will work best to kill what you have. For example, one of the things that commonly we'll see in sinuses is something called MRSA, which stands for methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. It's just a type of staph infection, and if it's antibiotic resistant. And so if the doctor doesn't do the sensitivity test but only does the culture, they identify the staph, but then they won't identify whether or not it's resistant to antibiotics. And so if they give you an antibiotic that it has a resistance to, it's not going to serve you all that well. It's actually going to help mold proliferate without killing the bacterial infection. And again, anytime you take an antibiotic, you can disrupt your microbiome for up to a year, research studies show. And remember, that microbiome is very important for overall immune system health. So we don't want to just take the antibiotic without knowing whether it's the right antibiotic to take or the right move to take. You want to make sure, ask your doctor to run that culture sensitivity to give you the best option for the medicine that might be the most effective in those cases. So always important to ask that question. So sinus infection, very, very common cause of headaches as well. So now let's talk about some natural remedies. So aside from, again, chiropractic, massage, acupuncture, again, if they're temporary relief, we've got to now move over into this realm. And in this realm, we've got vitamins and minerals. Magnesium can be one of the most effective elements to help reduce either a tension-based headache and as well as a chemical-based headache. So magnesium is a natural muscle relaxer, and that's why it can work so well. So, for those of you that have these headaches that come and they get triggered, especially with stress, if you've got a lot of stress in your life, taking magnesium can help calm the muscles down in the neck and in the shoulder area. And an Epsom salt bath is actually a very, very effective way, a nice natural remedy. So taking supplemental magnesium, 600 milligrams a day, in some cases as much as 1,000, can be helpful to alleviate muscle tension-based types of headaches, but also Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate, MgSO4, you pour that in the bathtub, right? And you can do a hot soak in the bathtub and you can get some relief. Now, there are a number of different essential oils that can also help with this type of problem, and lavender is one of them because it has a calming effect. So you can rub a lavender oil into the muscles along the occiput, along the back of the neck. It can be very effective. Lemon balm can have a very calming and relaxing effect as well as a natural remedy. Another thing that oftentimes gets overlooked and doesn't get used is a moist, warm towel. So just taking a nice thick cloth, and you can even put some of the essential oil into it so that, when you apply it to the back of the neck, remember that warmth increases blood supply. So you're going to get more oxygen and blood into the muscle, and that's going to serve to help it relax better. So that can be a very, very effective way, again, at trying to ameliorate some of the pain. Now, there are some natural things that can be done if you have an inflammatory headache as well. And some of my favorites in terms of what you can take are, I have one, if you've never tried turmeric, it can be used, but it's got to really be used in higher doses, 3 to 5 grams, to really be super effective at reducing symptoms associated with these. So you've got to get the dosing high enough for it to be effective, because if you're just popping a 500 milligram turmeric, for most people that's just not enough to really get it up there. Another one that can be very effective, bioflavonoids with quercetin and vitamin C can be in a very effective combination, can work very, very well for pain. As a matter of fact, some research studies show that that combination, bioflavonoids, quercetin, and vitamin C, can actually outperform a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory like aspirin or ibuprofen. So natural ways without damaging your gut. Remember, the problem with medications like ibuprofen, aspirin, Celebrex, and some of the other NSAIDs like naproxen is that they actually, even at low doses, can damage the intestinal lining, the upper small intestine as well as the stomach. They can create bleeding. And that blood loss, if you take it chronically, if you take it on a regular basis, can cause occult blood loss that leads to iron deficiency anemia. Understand that iron deficiency anemia leads to less oxygen into your muscles, and that can lead to a structural headache, because when your muscles don't have enough oxygen, they go into more spasm. They have a tendency to be much more tight. So long-term use of drugs that actually that can create an iron deficiency, that can actually be, you know, a potential to trigger this issue. And then the Tylenols and the other medicines that run through the liver, and I'm talking about over-the-counter stuff, can affect your liver. And one of the things that Tylenol can do is it can inhibit, or it can stress or overtax your liver, leading to glutathione reduction, and glutathione reduction can be a major problem as well. So I actually have a number of different things. If you go check it out on Gluten Free Society, we have something called ultra turmeric, which is a concentrated high dose turmeric. And then one of the other things that we have that's a mixture of these is called InflamaShield, and it's a mixture of vitamin C, quercetin, bioflavonoids, and something called a proanthocyanidin. So it can be very, very effective. We use it very frequently when people are trying to wean off of steroid-based medications because of its effect at helping to support a healthy inflammatory response. So again, these are some very natural things that can be done. Magnesium can be extremely effective. In many cases, B12 it can be effective. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, when it comes to nutritional supplementation, you can use things, but to reduce inflammation or to support healthy inflammation or to reduce the pain response. But at the end of the day, it's very, very important to understand that none of these things should just be used to manage pain. Like, that's not what we're trying to talk about today. Remember that, you know, in functional medicine, the goal is not to mask why the pain is there or that the pain is there. The goal is to find out why the pain is there. And so the pain is probably not there because of a turmeric deficiency. The pain is probably not there as a result of a bioflavonoid deficiency. It's just that these things have anti-inflammatory properties that can be very, very helpful. So ultimately, you want to go back and have all these other things looked at and assessed, because this is where oftentimes you're going to find that deeper underlying reason as to why that headache is there. Okay, let's open up the floor for questions. Okay. Weather change. Yeah, barometric pressure changes can definitely lead to that. One of the things that can be done for those pressure changes, those headache pressure changes, is if you're following the weather, is if you've got a great chiropractor, go get an adjustment before the weather changes. That'll help minimize those weather-based headaches. Very effective. What can you do if you ate gluten by accident? You know, there's a number of different things. I recommend heavy doses of vitamin C, and I also recommend something called Gluten Shield, and you can find those at glutenfreesociety.org. If you go to the shop, there's a supplement called Gluten Shield. So vitamin C, heavier doses, 5 to 10 grams for about a week. I would say at least a week after being gluten, especially if it was a heavy gluten exposure where you're really suffering a lot of side effects and symptoms as it relates to that. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so Christina says, I was put on blood pressure medicine to try and help my headaches, and now they want to add Topamax. I'm afraid of all this medicine and don't know how to stop the cycle. I have constant headaches. So Christina, this is where, again, if you haven't been either to a functional medicine doctor or a good chiropractor, It's hard to give you an exact answer here, because if you were having headaches induced by high blood pressure, which is a possibility, they may be trying to lower that blood pressure, and rightfully so. Obviously you don't want your blood pressure to be spiking, but if your blood pressure is not really high, then lowering it is not necessarily going to do much for headaches. So again, sometimes what happens if high blood pressure is creating the headache, there's a lot of research on this, is that the C1, which is the very top bone in your spine, in your cervical spine, if it's misaligned even just a little bit, it can actually trigger elevations in blood pressure. It can actually cause high blood pressure, and there are some chiropractors that are trained in adjusting that vertebrae to a very accurate degree. And there are studies that show that can lower blood pressure. That can actually correct a high blood pressure in somebody who has done diet and exercise and stretching and all the other things that come along with trying to reduce blood pressure, and it's been ineffective. So again, having somebody assess your C1 might be a better solution than more medication, because understand that medications for blood pressure particularly are notorious for causing magnesium deficiency and calcium deficiency and potassium deficiency and CoQ10 deficiency. And those nutritional deficiencies are also notorious for causing headaches. So you kind of get stuck in that rut. You get stuck in that catch-22 where you start taking a medicine to lower your pressure. The headaches don't change, but now you start inducing nutritional deficiencies that can lead to or help contribute to headaches in other ways. And now where are you going to go? What's the next step there? Just usually it's adding another medicine. So I would go and look at having that really solid evaluation structurally and rule out that C1, okay, that atlas abnormality. That C1 abnormality is very prolific, can be, in headache problems. Hormone-related headaches. Robin asking if I have any information on hormone-related headaches. I do. The two things that I have seen be the most related to hormone-based headaches, so if we're talking about hormone headaches, you got to get the food dialed in, because the food itself, check for gluten sensitivity. Those of you who don't know how to do that, you do genetic testing. Genetic testing for gluten sensitivity is the best way to ascertain whether or not you need to change your diet and get the grain out. But dairy is can be a very, very big trigger, even though it's a hormonal headache during, if you're talking about cyclically, meaning around or premenstrually, your cycle, understand that dairy and gluten both are hormone disruptors. So they don't necessarily have to cause the headache the entire month. They can disrupt the hormones enough that when your cycle comes, that hormone shift occurs, leading to headache problems. Now, nutritionally, vitamin B6 can be very, very helpful for premenstrual headaches. So can evening primrose oil if we're talking about supplementation that can help bring some relief. So can magnesium. These are probably three of the best things that you can do if you're struggling with hormonal-based headaches. But also, I would ask your doctor to check your hormone levels, particularly your progesterone and your estrogen and your different metabolites of estrogen, and couple that with food allergy testing, because in my experience, most of the time they're not true hormonal headaches. What they are is something else is disrupting your cycle, disrupting your hormones, and the side effect that you're experiencing is actually a headache. The other time I've seen this be really persistent, a hormonal headache, is if somebody was being exposed to chronic mold. So mold in the environment, mold in the home, that can be a manifestation of hormonal changes and abnormalities that can lead to cyclic headaches. Good question. If your regular doc doesn't want to test for vitamin deficiencies, find another doctor. Look, we're at a point now where you've got to find a doctor who can do things that are meaningful. If they're not willing to test them, it's because they don't have the knowledge or experience. You don't want somebody who's inexperienced and unknowledgeable running lab tests or advanced lab tests that require a degree of education and intelligence and interpretation. Because even if he ran them for you, if he doesn't want to run them, it's probably because, he's not really up to speed on the interpretation and how to look at those values or how to really assess it. So it's time to find a doctor who's got some nutritional training. That would be my advice. There's not one list, because there's a lot of different types of tests that need to be run in order to truly assess nutritional status accurately. Oh, so Christina coming back on that. I don't have high blood pressure. It was to help with the veins opening up. But probably not the veins as much as the arterial walls. There is a difference. So in that situation, magnesium would be something that would be just as effective. Remember, magnesium is a natural vasodilator. Something else that you might try too, Christina, is arginine, L-arginine. I can write that down on the board. L-arginine is a free-form amino acid, and it helps to produce something called nitric oxide, NO. And nitric oxide is your natural vasodilator, so it naturally leads to a dilation. And that's going to be a lot safer and potentially equally, potentially effective. Again, it depends on whether or not you have an arginine deficiency. But again, I would go back more and look at how to assess these other things with your doctor as opposed to throwing different blood pressure medications at it. Okay. I love this. Veronica says, I noticed my headaches diminished greatly because of diet change by 90%. I do also have a reverse curve in my neck and rib pain. My chiropractor said I have pre-arthritis and it's structural. Yeah, and that can be the case. Again, more than one problem. We're all entitled to more than one problem, unfortunately. Kathy's asking how to test for celiac. I don't really recommend testing for celiac. Here's why. I mean, it's a good question. If you test for celiac and you don't have it, it doesn't mean you're not gluten sensitive. In essence, celiac disease and gluten sensitivity are not synonyms. They're not the same thing. We could say this: everybody with celiac disease is gluten sensitive, but not everybody with gluten sensitivity has celiac disease. So if you only test for celiac disease but you don't have it, you could be very misled as it relates to gluten. So the way that you want to test for gluten sensitivity is through genetic testing, running a series of genetic tests. We actually we provide that to the general public. If you want to learn more about genetic testing and gluten, you can go to glutenfreesociety.org, and there's a big button at the top that says genetic testing, and you can follow that link and you can get more information, you know, about genetic testing. Okay. Yeah, somebody chimed in and said you can go to your primary and ask for a celiac panel. The problem with the celiac panels is the false negatives. By the time you actually, if you truly are celiac, it can take 30 years for it to show up positive on lab tests. In the biopsy, which is the gold standard where they run a scope through you, that I've seen people have 19 biopsies be negative and the 20th one was positive. So relying on those types of tests is not the greatest idea, in my opinion, to really get an accurate assessment of whether or not you need to go gluten-free. And if you rely on them and they come back negative and you don't go gluten-free, I've seen people where that's happened and they suffered for another 10 years until they found my office, and then we actually got them taken care of with the right type of testing. Okay, let's see here. We got a bunch of you chiming in on our YouTube channel. Matthew from Perth, Australia, and Susan from Houston. Yeah, a bunch of you chiming in. Oh, Amy says, you've already helped me so much in Denver. Your DNA test was awesome. Thanks, Amy. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe somebody else who's on the fence about whether or not they should get that done, maybe you'll help them make that decision. Let's see here. We got Dr. Joe from Cleveland, Ohio. Thanks for tuning in, Dr. Joe. Oh, Matthew says, cut out gluten, cut out headaches. It worked for me. Yeah, that's a big one. I can't emphasize going gluten-free enough. A lot of people don't realize that, that gluten is a major, major headache trigger. But again, if we're talking about all these different possibilities, a lot of people have more than one thing going on. Kathy says, my 27-year-old son got sick. Doctor thought it was strep. Triggered a headache that was not broken. Several MRIs, spinal tap, and blood tests, and no answers. Hey, Kathy, get your son to a great functional medicine doctor. Quit messing around with convention. If they haven't fixed it by now, they're probably not going to. Yeah, so Kelly says, I get a headache under the base of the skull. When I try to relieve the pain by rubbing my thumb, it makes me nauseous. You've got trigger points, and so one of the trigger points in the base of the occiput can actually create nausea, and sometimes you've got to work through those things. This is where somebody who's really versed in trigger point therapies might be very, very helpful. This is where acupuncture might be extremely helpful for you without all the side effects and symptoms. All right, let's see here. I like this. Dr. Joe says, I've been a board-certified Atlas orthogonal chiropractor for more than 10 years. Good job on your structural explanation. Thanks, Doc. Maybe just post up where you're at so that people who are listening, if they're looking for a good Atlas adjuster, can find you. No problem with that. I like to share that and make sure people can get the help they're looking for. Yes, I like this. Grant says, I went to my doc last week for problems, began following the FODMAPs diet. My digestion is much better, no longer get headaches. Yeah, so I mean, FODMAP diets, which are basically low carbohydrate, low sugar diets, can be also very, very effective for people that are suffering. So I don't know, somebody's asking me to make a video about serum-derived bovine immunoglobulin concentrate. I've got a nice page on that already if you want to go read more about those with references and resources. If we get that link up for Immune Shield for our listeners on YouTube to help them out and help them understand SBI better. Okay, let's see here. Want to make sure I get all these answered in tonight. Well, like this, Marie says, my headaches, migraines, and sinus infections gone since gluten and grain-free. No more taking puffers either. Love it. Love that testimonial. How effective is the genetic testing for kids? Amber, genetic testing is 99.9% accurate because it's genes. It's not affected by what you're currently eating. It's not affected by whether you ate gluten or didn't eat gluten. It's genetic, and your genes don't ever change. Their behaviors change, but what they actually are don't. And so genetic testing is extremely effective whether you're a child or an adult. Let's see here. Okay, looks like we got them all answered. That's a first. So, here's what I want to do next. So we're going to wrap this up, but before we do, remember what our mission is. It's to help 100 million people, right? We're trying to help the chronically sick people of the world get better. Can't do that without your help. So as I help you every Monday night, you help me every Monday night by sharing this information with somebody you love and or somebody that you care about. And tonight's topic again is headaches. So if you've got somebody who struggles with chronic headaches, make sure you copy the URL or share this video with them. The other thing I want to make sure that you do is, if you haven't already, go over to glutenfreesociety.org, glutenfreesociety.org, and sign up for our gluten-free survival kit and newsletter. It's free to you, no cost. All you have to do is go and punch in your name and email, and we'll send you just a ton of wonderful free information on navigating the gluten-free lifestyle and what it really means to do that and how you can do it better. Also, make sure that you go and visit Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. Pick up a copy of No Grain, No Pain. It's our reference journal here for these episodes, for these shows. In essence, it's a place where I have people start. And so if you're struggling to try to find help in convention and you haven't been able to find that help, no matter what you've done, no matter what procedure you've tried, no matter what kind of medications that you've been put on, this is the starting place that you begin. And if you're still struggling, even following the No Grain, No Pain diet, then you can jump over to chapters 10 and 11 and you can read all about functional medicine and how functional medicine and running the right types of labs and getting the right unique biochemical blueprint to what you need to do can take you to a whole nother level and help you improve your health. So again, share, like, comment, subscribe. Go get your copy of No Grain, No Pain, and join me next Monday night. We'll be back again for another episode of Take Dr. Osborne's Brain. Have a great evening. Maybe just post up where the people who are listening, if they're looking